The Cold War is one of the most heated conflicts in world history. It consists of many different events that affected the state of the Cold War and the world as we know it, in one way or another. Today, I'll be ranking the top 5 most significant Cold War events out of the 32 events my teachers provided me with. I've rated all events out of 5 stars, 1 star being, this event was pointless, a waste of space, grade 12 curriculum filler, to 5 stars being, this is so significant you need to know it for a unit test, or you bomb the test like Bikini Atoll. Anyways, with this system explained, let's start with... The Cuban Missile Crisis comes in at number 5 with a star rating of 4. This event is the point in the Cold War where tensions between the USSR and the USA peaked. The build-up to this crisis was a battle in Cuba known as the Bay of Pigs, where America would try and invade and disarm Cuban missiles only to be pushed back and lose to the Cuban forces. This was a big hit to the American prestige and is one reason why the Cuban Missile Crisis is significant. Another significant thing about this event is the fact that mutually assured destruction capabilities have been achieved by the USSR in response to America's positioning of nuclear weaponry in countries close to the USSR like Italy and Turkey. This crisis was a huge turning point mainly for USSR to take the war to America and knock them down a peg by using Fidel Castro as an ally really well. Finally, if this crisis had gone out of control, the entire world would have ended. This is what would happen if the nuclear war tension during the Cuban Missile Crisis had boiled over. Your entire family tree gone. For these reasons, the Cuban Missile Crisis slips its way into 5th place, just behind number 4, which happens to be... The Vietnam War comes in at number 4 with a star rating of 4.2. The Vietnam War is one of the most infamous wars of the Cold War, and it had a lot of significance for the two main superpowers at the time. Of course, I'm talking about the USA and the USSR, as the stakes of this war were very high. Like the Korean War, this would be another case of the United States having to fight to stop a communist takeover, except this time the conflict had come to Vietnam. The United States would end up sending thousands of men to Vietnam, but in the end they would lose Vietnam to communism. This defeat was another big blow to the United States as the world would gain more communist influence. And on the other end, the USSR would gain another place that backed up their societal beliefs. Another significant thing to come out of this war was a big change to the United States, particularly in their foreign policy. During and after Vietnam, people had started to not trust American politicians in their foreign policy, as they had started to express anger with the US sending people to stalemate wars like Vietnam, where most soldiers would just go in and die and be killed for essentially nothing. In the end, this war was super significant for the US and USSR as well. Now rewind back to what I said earlier, like the Korean War. With that, number 3 is gonna be the Korean War, coming in at number 3 with a star rating of 4.4. The Korean War is easily the most significant proxy war to commence in the entirety of the Cold War. To put the significance of the Korean War simply, it's essentially the origin of proxy war between the USSR and the United States. Every war sprung from the Cold War would look and feel like the Korean War. For example, Vietnam we just talked about is very similar to the Korean War in many ways. The Korean War being the origin point of proxy war makes it super significant, but this isn't the full extent of its significance. The battle itself is also very important. The fight for the US was to ensure that South Korea did not get taken over by communist North Korea, as it would spread communism in more places around the world. And before this, America vowed to stop the spread of communism no matter what, and the outcome of this battle would show if they could uphold this or not. The opposing USSR was hoping that North Korea would take over the South to create an entirely new, full communist Korea, as this would give them more allies and more prestige for communism. And to top it all off, the ending of this war would also see the death of arguably the most successful leader of communism, Joseph Stalin, which was hugely significant for the USSR, as with Stalin dead, new power could take over the USSR, which could threaten the grip of communism over the Soviet Union. In the end, the Korean War may have ended in a stalemate with very little change to Korea's borders. The impact of the Korean War from start to finish was something we had never seen before that was significant to not just one superpower in the Cold War, but both of them. With that, the Korean War easily squeezes into the top 3. Anyways, enough about wars. It's time to talk about number 2, which is... The collapse of the Soviet Union comes in at number 2 with a star rating of 4.6. The collapse of the USSR is what I'd like to call the true end of the Cold War, signifying to the world that the US had won the long-fought battle against the Soviet Union that we now call the Cold War. The significance of this collapse is that the world's capital of communism had figuratively been killed from the inside. The influence of Soviet leader Gorbachev was slowly diminishing, and the tight grip that the Soviets had on all the communist republics around them had finally been loosened near the end of the war. This caused all those republics to be free of communism, which made them become their own independent countries with their own way of dictating societal flow. Essentially, communism as a concept had lost its greatest power in the USSR after Gorbachev's influence had gone weaker and weaker. With his influence getting weaker, the USSR would crash and burn, hitting communism as a way of running society hard. With this collapse, the victor of the Cold War would emerge, which we now know as the United States of America and capitalism, marking this event as one of the most significant events to ever happen in the Cold War's history. Now, the true end of something is always important, but I believe that there's one other end to the Cold War that I think was just a little bit more significant than the collapse of the Soviet Union. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at the most significant event in the Cold War's history. Coming in at number 1 with a star rating of 4.8 is the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the other end of the Cold War I mentioned in number 2. Now are you saying, what the hell is this guy talking about, bro? The Cold War only has one ending, and that's the fall of the USSR. Well, this way of thinking is narrow-minded because the collapse of the Berlin Wall is what I consider to be the symbolic / people's end of the Cold War. Now hear me out. The Berlin Wall is easily the most important symbol of the Cold War, as it was the first structure ever built to showcase the tension and divide between the values of the more capitalist USA and communist Soviet Union, as the Berlin Wall was created to be the barrier between East Germany, communist, and right Germany, capitalist. This makes the Berlin Wall the symbol for the divide in the world and its societal beliefs, which means the collapse of this wall signifies the end of the tensions between the world's scuffle to determine which is better, not only for the countries but for the people residing within the countries as well. If you look throughout the Cold War, we see people trying to escape the east side of Germany, figuratively showing us that the people's desire was to live under capitalism rather than communism. And this one eventually had the wall busted down and people standing atop its rubble ecstatic with the destruction of the barrier between capitalism and communism. This showed us that the people knew that the Cold War tensions were finally fizzled out, with the divider between the haves gone forever. This shows us that this event wasn't only significant to the leaders and people of the two superpowers involved in the war, but it symbolically stands for the people and their end of the Cold War. That's why I believe it deserves to be number 1, even over something like the collapse of the Soviet Union. The destruction of the Berlin Wall's significance means something to everyone who lived through the Cold War and experienced the horrors firsthand. It signifies the end of the war for every person and relieves humanity of the devastating effects of the Cold War. And there you have it. In ascending order, we have the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and finally the collapse of the Berlin Wall. If you're curious, on screen are the other 27 events that didn't make the cut for the top 5, as well as the star ratings I gave them. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed an explanation of the 5 most significant moments of the Cold War, in my opinion. And with that, I'm gonna sit in the corner and have Vietnam flashbacks. Have a great day, everyone.